Hey, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Your Life His Story podcast. I'm going to be your host today, Wade Vincent. And with me, I'm super excited today because I have Kelly Taubert, and she's the founder of the Women's Shine Conference. And I'm so excited to have you with me today.
I'm excited to be here, Wade. I can't wait.
Yeah. So, look, why don't, for those that don't know or not familiar with you, why don't you just give a little background of yourself and just kind of let the viewers, the listeners know, a little bit about
Okay.
you.
So let's see, I'm 56 years old. So not a lot of women will say that, but I just wanted to let you know that most of my life, I went to like a conservative church, and I just really never read my Bible, never did anything like that of any sort, and just kind of lived my life however I wanted to live it. And one day I decided to make a decision because I just felt like, there's got to be more to life. I felt like that. I don't know if you've ever felt like that, but my whole life
Absolutely,
I always feel like no matter what I did, and I loved being a mom. Like being a mom was probably my very favorite thing in the world because I have a boy and a girl, a daughter and a son, and they were my world, But I still, even then, felt like there was something more to my life. And so I think it was when I hit 55, I was like, you know what? There's got to be more to this. And, I was always a believer in God. I always, I had a picture of Jesus. There was a girl that painted a picture of Jesus. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And it's like what she thought Jesus looked like. And I always had that at work. I was always looking at it. But I just decided to start reading my Bible every day. And once I did, every single morning, I made it a commitment to do it. And once I started doing that, I heard God speak to me for the first time. And I thought, surely this is me.
Right.
This can't be, he can't be speaking. This is not God. It has to be me. So I just disregarded it for a long time, and he just kept speaking and speaking. And so that's kind of where my journey started, is like by reading my Bible every day, I got to this point where God spoke to me to write a book. And that's where it started.
Okay.
So,
and like previous to that, did you ever have a desire to write a book?
No. And that's honestly, like, English was not my subject. Like it was not something. I'm a good speller. I can spell anything, but I was not good at like English type things. And so writing a book, I like to read books, but I never like to write a book. And so I know it's not something that's always been something that I wanted to do. And so that's why I kind of just kept disregarding it over and over again. And so he even gave me the title of the book, which was interesting. And it was Let God's Light Shine Through You.
So I have a copy. If you haven't picked one up, you should.
Yes.
And so that kind of led you to like this women's conference thing.
Right. Yeah. So I think a lot of us, we get on the internet, on social media, and I was doing all this like digital marketing and stuff like that. And once I started reading my Bible, it was like he said, don't leave my name out of it. Like it's not let your light shine, but let God's light shine through you.
Right.
And so anyway, I just kept disregarding it. Finally, I wrote the book. I just went home and got on a Word document and just started typing it. And my husband was just shocked. He's like, it's all I did. Like when I was home from work, I was typing, and it just flowed out of me. So I knew that this was something, because it's not something I wanted to do.
Right.
So I wrote the book, and I saw an advertisement because I had to publish it. I could self-publish maybe, but I didn't know. And I saw an advertisement for TBN, Trilogy Publishing. And so I just said, I'm going to give it a shot. I got an interview with them, and they called me. She goes, you know what? Just send us a Word document. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Send it to us, and we'll let you know if we're going to publish it. And so I did. I sent her the Word document by email. And then 2 weeks later, it was a Friday morning, she called and she said, we want to publish it. And that just I was so excited because I thought, wow, this is really a real thing. If they're going to publish the book. So, and as you know, I mean, it's a journey to write a book, but we did it. And I feel like it changed so many people's lives because through like social media, people reading the book, TBN, would advertise it. And people started reaching out to me, and they were like, man, your book made me think of things I haven't thought of before. And so I realized that not just women, men too, but women needed something. And so I was on the way to work. I was working in Houston, and I was on the way to work, and I just felt like God put it on my heart to do a women's conference. So my daughter-in-law was like, we were talking about, what can we name the conference? She goes, well, what about Shine? because it comes from the book.
Sure,
and so
sure.
we named it the Shine Women's
Yeah,
Conference.
makes total sense.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. So
So what, as you were telling that story, I was thinking, surely there's some listeners out there that are like, so you just totally stepped out into a realm that you hadn't done before,
totally.
like never wrote a book.
Yes.
And so, what I find that it's worked in my life as well is that sometimes you just got to step out not knowing everything.
That's right.
When God puts something on your heart, you just got to kind of get out there without having. I'm a person, honestly, I like to know the end from the beginning.
Yes.
But you don't always get that
No.
that clear of a vision. You just got to kind of step out. So that's pretty amazing. So then if I can backtrack a little bit, tell me a little bit about like your childhood growing up. What was that like? You said you were kind of, you always knew about Jesus, but like, how was your growing up?
So it's interesting, like my parents, I've done a lot of like talking with them, since I wrote the book and did the conference, because, they were so proud. They were there at the conference. But my dad said, Kelly, from the time you were a little girl, I loved everyone. He said, you would go to people and me and your mom would be like, you want to spend the night with everybody? You want to go be with them? And he said, we'd be in a store and you would reach for people, like if someone was talking to you. And he said, we always worried someone's going to take her because she's just so friendly. But I feel like God put that love for people in my heart because I've always been that way. And my daughter, she wrote a part in the book, Britton Bickham, and she just said, Mom, we'd go to the grocery store and we would go check out and the lady would tell me her whole life story. And then the lady would say, I don't know why I'm opening up to you in this way, but, she would just start talking to me.
Right.
So she always felt like there was something on my life I was supposed to do. And my parents said the same thing because I've always loved people. So
it's interesting you say that because I don't know the timeline, maybe it's been a few years ago or so, but we met at like a kind of a networking event.
Right.
And you were actually talking about the Shine Conference, and I'd never, I didn't know who you were. I'd never seen you before, but you got up and started talking. And it was like I just instantly felt like I needed to. Okay, we have to. I have to like do something to help you do this. You know what I'm saying? Help you with the conference. And then it was like I think it was a short time later. Like we're like instant friends. Like,
right.
And we went to dinner with you and your husband. And
yes.
we're like old friends.
And you played the guitar in the worship team for the Shine Conference. Yeah. We just kind of evolved,
Yeah, and it was just amazing to see. Like I was kind of in the background, I guess, and just to see this first event for our first event, and I think you had almost 700 people. Almost 700 people at a first event. So that's got to be God because none of us are smart enough to plan that. Right?
No, I'm definitely not. And it was interesting because when I went to plan the conference, I went and met with the Holiday Inn, and she said, "How many people are you going to have?" And so it's a leap of faith, like you said.
Right.
I feel like if we don't take risk in life, you're never going to know what God's plan is for you. And I feel like I'm a walking example of that. But I went in there and they even reminded me of it. The lady at the Holiday Inn that helped me with it. And she said, Kelly, when you came in, you said we might have 100 to 200 people. And that's hoping most of my family comes. I was just hoping because I was like, I hope they show up, Right. And so we ended up, we actually sold 700 tickets. We had about 660 people there. And it was the most amazing thing to look over. It was emotional, to look out and see because I knew God did that. I knew it.
I thought, and because I was, I wasn't able, I guess, to attend the women's conference.
Yeah, that's right.
I wasn't qualified, but playing on the worship team, so I was there and I'm a part of it. And I thought it was such a first class event. It was so well planned and so well executed for a first event. So I would definitely give you props for that.
Well, thank you so much. It was kind of one of those things. We had about 12 people that helped us on our Shine team, and my family just stepped up and really helped. But it was the looks on my family's face was like, wow, like we all were just in awe of what God did that day. We really were. And the lives that were changed. We did a survey afterwards, and just the things that I heard that happened to women, like how their lives were changed and were so much better for it, just made it just another confirmation.
Yeah, I just love how I have to imagine you're first doing this and you're thinking, 100, maybe 200 people and maybe people enjoy it. And then as it evolves, you're like, and this really changed some people's lives. And all the feedback I know that you've had, like I've heard nothing but good things, about it.
Really good.
But it's amazing to me that how we just take you just take that small step, and
Right.
then all this happens. If you wouldn't have taken that step, then none of it happens.
That's right.
You know what
And
I'm
the
saying?
people that I've met so many really good people that have a heart for God, that are really wanting to do things. And I think about all of us, like I could have just, I think I've mentioned this to you. I could have just sat on the couch and watched Netflix and, just live my life,
Right.
and I think what I've done is, what God has done is just reach people that needed this in their life. There's a lot of people that are going through things. KFDM News, like they sponsored the event and they kept having me on the news. And there was one time before I went on the news that I felt God say, "Tell them they're not alone." And that wasn't even anything I was going to talk about. It'd be like coming on this podcast.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought, wow, tell them they're not alone. Okay. So I switched what I was going to say. And I told them, just know you're not alone. I feel like God wants to tell you you're not alone. And people were reaching out saying that they were feeling at their lowest point, that they felt like they didn't have anyone. Like maybe they've had a lot of death in their family. And it just hit me. It's like, and I think that's really what my heart is for the conference, is to let people know that, God has a plan for your life. You're not alone. No matter if everyone around you has gone, that He does have a plan for your life. He had it before you were ever born. And I think that's really my heart for the whole thing.
I'm thinking that I definitely think that people really just crave connection.
They do.
You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? And we've, I guess, sort of never been more connected. Like we get to see what everybody's having for dinner on social media.
Right. Exactly.
All this information we probably don't even need. And so, but I think people are putting that out there because they want to feel connections.
Right.
It's like, anybody that's putting anything out on social media, man, you're like checking to see how many likes you got. Right?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And because you want that, hey, did I connect? Did something I say connect with somebody?
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And I've learned, and I spoke about this at the conference, that social media is not always true, and so a lot of people look at it and say, wow, she's going on vacations all the time. Look how much money they have. Look, but looks are deceiving. I always say, I hate to say it, but sometimes it's fake book, because people put that out there. They're putting their best self out there.
Yeah. So, it's funny you say that, because my sister, a lot of times we would vacation with my brother and sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And so, I would put a few things out there, I'm saying, a little bit. I've tried to get better about, let me just be in the moment, and I'm not trying to make, I'm not trying to do a mini series about my vacation.
Exactly. Yeah.
But my sister-in-law, she just takes a ton of pictures, right? But she will just she'll put this stuff out for weeks and weeks. And people I've had people say, "Wade, man, you're always on vacation."
Yes.
I'm like, actually, I'm not. It's just, it looks
are deceiving.
Yeah.
It looks like I'm that way.
Yeah.
Because when my kids were young, they used to say, God, why can't we vacation like all of them? Because
Right.
it starts from a young age, and I just want people to know that that's their best self. That's not actually true.
Right. Right. So there's obviously a side that that we want to connect with, to the person that's kind of hurting and struggling. And part of the book Shine is like letting God's light shine, in you, through you. But what would you say to somebody that might be listening out there that's not even sure that God exists, or doesn't even, like, how would you sort of introduce them or connect them to God? What would you say to that?
So one of the things I've learned, because like for the past year, I've just consumed myself with just learning as much as I can, because I wanted to learn as much as I can about the Bible and just about people. And one of the things I've learned is there is an enemy out there, and most people don't want to know that even exists. But I always say, if you believe in God and heaven and the angels, you have to believe there's something else, and it's a darker side, And so sometimes, and this is what I always say, is like when you're young, you have this. Think about like when you're 5 years old, you have this joy. I mean, you don't have any cares, and you just have, Jesus said, the small children, like he loved the small children because they're just their innocence,
Right.
And so, but as we grow older, we have our light gets dimmed, because we have people start telling us we're not good enough. They start finding things wrong with us. Maybe you're abused. I mean, there's so many things that could go wrong. So you get into your adult years and you're like, there can't be a God, because he wouldn't let all these things happen to me. You know, why did all these things happen? But, you know, God wants you to have the best life. It's the enemy that doesn't. He doesn't want you to have that life, you know, and you can't blame everything on the enemy. That's not what I'm saying.
Sure.
But I'm just saying he does sometimes make you see things in a different way. And God wants you to have the most abundant, great life and to let your light shine.
Yeah.
But the enemy puts you in that darkness.
Right. Yeah. And so I was thinking, because one of my earlier guests on the podcast, he had written a book, and there was a line in the book, and it like, which goes back to, if you never write the book.
True. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
You know, nobody hears those words, you know, and you know, I thought one of the worst things in the world is to, you know, a song that you wrote that nobody heard.
That's right.
Or a book that you never wrote that nobody read.
Oh, that's so true.
And
yes.
so, but there was this particular line in there, and it was, you know, because I always felt like, I'm also like that. Like, I think probably most of my problems is me, you know,
Yes.
rather than the devil coming
Right.
for me. But there is sometimes, you know, that he's definitely out there, and so, you know, he was talking about, you know, and he was kind of writing it in the perspective that God would be speaking to us. And he says, you know, don't think it's strange when the enemy brings a battle to you. He said, just understand that I'm bringing you to that battle,
Right.
to bring a victory, you know, for me, and to fight for those that are not yet ready to fight for themselves.
Right.
And just that line in that book totally changed my whole perspective on how I looked at a battle. So previously I'd be like, oh man, why am I going through this? And I feel, you know, whatever. And now I'm like, oh, it's on. Let's go.
That's
you know
right.
So yes, those things that are there, but we don't have to look at it like we're a victim to it.
That's right. That's right. And I think, you know, what I've learned is the same authority that Jesus had when he walked on the earth. As a believer, you have it inside of you. So if we knew that we have that authority, we would walk with such confidence. We would walk around. We could, no matter what troubles that we had in our life, you know, we could just overcome them.
Right.
But I think, you know, we get in this mindset, you know, and our words matter. You know, I've told my family this their whole life, and they just think you know, they used to think, gosh, she's saying it again. But the words you speak out of your mouth are so important, because if you're constantly speaking defeat and constantly speaking, you know, nothing works out for me, I'm always in debt, I never have anything, well, you'll get what you ask for.
Sure.
You know,
you know, it's something interesting, and you know, I'm in the middle of writing a book myself right now, my first one. So we kind of had a conversation before we started this.
Exactly.
About it. But one of the chapters is about, you know, making sure that your circle of influences, you protect that.
It's
right.
so true.
I mean, you love everybody, and you know, but who you let in your inner circle matters, because we're influenceable. Right?
Exactly.
So if I hang around with these people, you know, there was a saying, if you hung around with 5 drug addicts, you'd be the 6th.
That's right. I've heard that before.
Yeah, or if you hung around,
become like the 5 people
right,
you hang around.
So if you hang around 5 millionaires, you'd be the 6th, right? So, but when you're talking about who you hear speak the most, it's actually yourself.
That's so true.
You know, you're hearing your self-talk all the time. And so if your self-talk is very negative and very, you know, bringing you down the wrong path, it's, how do you stop that? You know, so you got to put the brakes on that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
You have to, like I heard somebody say this one time, like, could you go a whole day without complaining? It's harder than you think. Right. You know, because you're such in this habit of complaining. Yeah. But if you could just watch your words when you talk, because, you know, like, I know I said it before, but God wants you to live this great life because he has a plan. Right. So for me, he had this plan for me, but I think my whole life, I thought it was other things. Like, maybe, you know, it would be, maybe I did Mary Kay for a while. I'm always looking for something. I thought maybe I need to open a wedding venue. You know, I never knew exactly what it was, but this is what it was for my life. And just by the Shine Conference itself showed me that. It was like confirmation that that's what it was. But, you know, I think a lot of times, like, you've heard that analogy, if you just sit in a parked car and you don't go anywhere, or you could just put it in drive and start to go. And I think that's what you have done. And I think that's what I've done. We just take that first step of faith. Yeah. And that's the hardest step, because you just see the risk. You know?
Well, there's no guarantee of success.
That's right.
Right. You know what I'm saying? But again, if you don't do anything, it's for sure not
It's so
success. You
true.
know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's where the trust comes in.
Yeah,
You know?
and for sure, because it's like you want to know. I think anybody that puts any effort into something, you want some good outcome from that.
Right.
You want to know that your effort wasn't in vain.
Exactly.
So going through when you were getting ready to do this podcast, doing the book, and God's like shifting your life. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Did you run into times where like what am I doing this for? Or
Yes.
questioning it?
Yeah, there's still times, where you just get in your mind, and I
Right.
think we all do that. You're like, sometimes I feel like I hear, "Who are you to be doing this?"
Right. Sure.
Where's that coming from?
Right.
It's either me or somebody's telling me,
Right.
because where's that thought coming from? And so what I learned, and I spoke about it in my book, is like our thoughts are like on a spinning wheel, and we can choose to think of it or we can think something else.
Right.
So you can get in this negative thought pattern where you just constantly can't get out of it. You're like stuck. You cannot get out of it. And I feel like that God has this purpose deep inside of you, and it's just up to you to let it out by taking a risk, by taking that first step. Because like us with the Shine Conference, we started getting invitations from other people to come bring it there. And what if I'd have never stepped out? There's people that want to open like maybe a children's, like something for children. Maybe their passion is missions. There's always something on your heart. And I always feel like it's whatever you're passionate about and you enjoy doing. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and I'll just speak for me, and one of the reasons let me just say this. One of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast was, and I wanted to make sure we're whoever's on this, and we're talking like we're very authentic. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes you whether in church or whatever, or you see TV evangelists or whatever,
Yes,
and they're presenting this like image, and you're like, I can't live up to that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
There's
And
no way.
so I wanted to make sure, hey, listen, we do things and we move forward, but it's not like it's without struggle. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? It's not that we don't deal with some questions, or are we good enough, or whatever. That stuff definitely creeps in, and you got to shut it down. You know what I'm saying?
I thought about that too at the conference. Like you see people up on a stage and you think, oh, wow, I could never do that. And it's just I just was obedient to what he was telling me. It's not something I envisioned for my life was to be on a stage or to write a book. But I think sometimes he has something he's trying to tell you. He'll even bring people. So I always feel like we've talked about this earlier, like it's confirmation. Like when someone comes up and tells you something that you might have already been thinking of, I feel like maybe, God uses those people to come give you confirmation. So
one of the things I've learned, and it kind of applies to this, we're in the beginning first episodes of the podcast. And so for me, I've kind of been like a little bit of a perfectionist, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm like, if I can't do this at this high level,
right,
I'm not going to do it. That's actually not served me well.
That's right.
And what I've learned is that, go ahead and start before you get it all figured out. You know what I'm saying? And that's something I kind of, just being honest, I struggle with, because I want to make sure I'm doing it at a high level.
You
right?
want to make sure you've researched it. It's good.
Yeah. I mean, but then when I reel that back in, that's driven by ego.
It's true. Yeah, I know.
And so like I had to shut that down. I said, listen, I'm going to do the best I can with this, but it's not about how good of a host I can be, or
That's
how
right.
good of a production I can do, because I'm very aware that I'm limited in that skill set. It's about getting the message out, about people like hearing the story of what God's done in your life.
That's right.
And then hoping that it inspires somebody that's listening or viewing, that to also do what you did, step out and do some things that God's calling you to do.
That's right. Because that's the hardest step. The first step's the hardest, because you're putting yourself out there. You're taking a risk. I've told you this earlier, the conference is not a cheap thing, to put on a conference for everyone. But you just take that step and you just step out. And if you make a mistake or you fail at it, then that's just okay. At least you didn't just sit there and not do anything.
You learn something.
You learn something.
You learn it and you do it better the next time.
That's right.
I was actually listening to a guy, and he was talking about business, and he was like, and they were like, how are you so much more successful than other people? He said, well, I've started and failed 10 times before they've even finished their last meeting on how they're going to do it perfectly.
Right. You just don't see all that.
Yeah. He said, I've already made 10 mistakes and I'm moving on, and I'm already past them, because they're still trying to figure out how to do it before they start.
That's
I was
right.
like, that makes a lot of
I
sense. You know
think
what
we're
I'm saying?
all guilty of that. You watch people on TV, or you'll think, wow, I wish I, could do what they did, but you didn't see all the failures and all the things that happened leading up to that.
Yeah, and so it's to me it's about like for me it's about let's get the message of Christ out there. We're not perfect. I'm not trying to be perfect. Or let me rephrase that. I'm working towards
Work,
perfection,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
But realizing that I'm a long way from that, but I can still help people. Like
Right.
I don't have to be perfect to help people.
That's so true. And some times, and we talked about, you mentioned this earlier, like you'll have difficult people in your life that you're around. Sometimes I feel like sometimes I'm surrounded by small minded people. And I feel like sometimes I have a bigger vision for my life, but it's God's vision for your life,
Right.
all of us. And so you finding the right people to be around that are cheering for you and are happy for you whenever you do something.
Right.
So important, because there are a lot of people that whether it's jealousy or whatever it is, bring you down.
Yeah,
So
I've noticed that you typically it's for whatever rating system you're using. So whoever's doing worse than you will be the ones that try to tear you down
that's right.
because they don't. You're making them uncomfortable by rising. You know what I'm saying?
And when you tell a small minded person about a big dream, they're immediately going to tell you, oh, there's no way, it's too expensive, there's no way you can do that.
Yeah, yeah.
And you just have to say, no, but I believe God can do it. I can trust what he does.
So we right before we started the podcast, you'd share with me what the conference cost.
Yeah.
If you'd have known at the beginning what it was going to cost, you'd have been like, yeah, I'm out.
There's no way.
Right?
Yeah. You think about it, it costs as much as a car, and you're thinking, there's no way I could do that.
Right.
And, we did it, at the end, and I should say God did it, because, and when it was all said and done, we almost broke even exactly. But if you'd have told me to start how much it was going to be, I probably would have never done it.
Yeah,
because we have this fear inside.
For sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because we don't have it all figured out.
No, we don't. We don't have it all figured out.
But fortunately, we serve a God that knows the end from the beginning.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? And he can, if he tells you to start, you can be confident. He's got the end figured out.
He does. Yeah. He definitely. I'm proof of that. And I just think a lot of times what I'm hearing from people a lot, like on social media, and like a lot of people reach out to me, they just don't understand why they had such a terrible childhood or all these bad things happen to them. But then, if there's such a good God, why did those things happen to me? And I just feel it on my heart right now to just tell people that, just to tell them that he didn't want those bad things to happen to you. He doesn't want someone to live a better life than you. He loves everybody. It would be like picking one of your children over another child.
Sure.
He would never do that.
Yeah.
And so if you can just for a moment, just think about it. Like if we're all his children, like he loves everybody the same, he didn't want you to go through those times. And if you could dig deep and try to find out what your plan is, you could overcome it. Like I feel like people could overcome it, because I'm not someone that is any better than anybody else, or you. We're not any better.
Right,
we just stepped out in faith, and that's all it takes.
Yeah. So, wow, my thoughts are racing right now. I'm just thinking about, when we step out in any kind of faith, that we have to really start trusting God beyond our ability, right?
Right.
Because anything that we do is going to be, I'm trying to come up with the right way to phrase this, but we want to do things that are beyond ourselves, right?
Right.
I mean, otherwise, like it's just limited to us, and that's like I don't want to be limited to
no, that's right,
and my abilities. And so when you step out and do some things, and you trust that he's going to bring the right people in, to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. Yeah, what I'm thrilled about is that you were talking about why does bad things happen and all this stuff. The good news is we serve an amazing God that can work all things together for good.
That's right.
So it's not that everything that happens to us is good.
That's right.
He will still work it to good.
Right.
And then and when you take yourself out of the victim mentality, like God's letting this happen to me and I'm stuck here and all this kind of, like, that's not the right attitude. You know what I'm saying? And when you're really grateful, like most of us, we're saying, man, I'm struggling today. Are you really? Like, cause you ate,
right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. And you drove your brand new car to work and you got a paycheck and and you spent the weekend camping or whatever you did. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Are you really
Yes.
struggling? You're really not. It's really emotional. You just kind of get yourself in that little, phase.
You're way more blessed than you realize. For
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I feel the same way. And I just feel like through my journey, through everything I did, it's just God's been with me every step of the way. And, people used to tell me that, like just what you said, we serve a great God and everything. And I was like, I know we did. But it's like when you see what he does in your life, like when I saw what happened at the conference, I saw the lives that were changed. It gives you so much more faith.
Right.
It builds you up so much stronger. And that's what I want for everybody, like whoever's listening, like just to know that you can have that same faith built up and do something extraordinary.
Yeah. Oftentimes we limit God in our minds to whatever our past we've seen.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And so it's like, well, I don't know if God will do anything because he didn't do it at this time or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And so I think there's a big battle of believing our life experience versus believing God.
That's right.
And that's a lot of times where our battle is. But when we step out and when we believe God, regardless of our whatever's happened in the past, right? You know what I'm saying? And you just step out there, it gives God the opportunity to do some miraculous things. And part of even this is like, the only reason I'm doing this is I just want to reach people. Like I want your story to reach people that it would never have reached.
That's right.
And them to hear your story and maybe be inspired. And what's the ripples on a pond effect of we have this conversation, somebody's inspired, they do whatever God's been pushing them to do, but they haven't done it yet, and they step out and do that, and then all the people that's affected, and then that person that they affect does it. You know what I'm saying? And so my hope is that this just has a ripple effect of just everybody kind of getting out there and doing what God wants them to do, because we're not in competition with each other.
No. And when you think about it, like think of all the people in the world. Like there's so many people. So you need, like God needs vessels. He needs people to get out there and do it. And so I've seen, just like you've seen in your life, I've seen what he does. And I want everybody to experience that and then go help other people see it too, For
sure. And I've always felt like I may not have climbed the ladder to the top of whatever anybody's picture is, but I've made it up enough rungs that I can reach back and pull somebody up.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so if I do that, but yet somebody's ahead of me on this particular journey and they reach down and pull me up, and we just continue to do that, we're all leveling up.
Right.
And it's for everybody's good,
right.
And so we're definitely not, there's no competition in the kingdom of God. There's really not.
There's not. And I feel like, you may not have had good parents. Sometimes our parents do the best they can do. They just did what they knew and they did the best they can do. And so sometimes you feel like, well, I didn't have a good upbringing. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that in my life. And I'm trying to tell people that, God, he's the best father you could ever have. He's 100 times better than any earthly father that you have.
Yeah.
And I just always want to tell people that it doesn't matter what you went through or how you grew up or any of that, because God's chosen you for something. And whatever it is that he's chosen you for, it would just be so sad. I always think about this, to get to heaven one day when you die and he shows you all these things that he had for you. Like this is what my plan was for you. But you stayed in negativity. You didn't think you were good enough. And you just stayed on the couch and watched Netflix.
Right.
But you didn't do it. And this is what I had for you. I just feel like that would be such a sad moment.
For sure.
Wouldn't you like to know what he had for you and you didn't step into it?
Yeah. And I think also it's understanding, and I won't pretend I have full understanding of everything, but I think sometimes when, whatever you lacked as a kid or what happened in your childhood is actually what drives you to,
right.
To reach out and minister to those that could, because you could feel it, like I did play around with drugs a little bit when I was younger, but I never got deep into it. So I was never a drug addict. I was never an alcoholic, but so I couldn't necessarily, I can tell people about, hey, there's deliverance for that, but I don't have the feeling, like I don't know the despair that they may have felt and be able to explain it. But in my life, you were talking about, like I had good parents, but it's funny because I'm a middle kid, so I got the middle kid syndrome.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I've heard of that.
So my older brother was mom's favorite, and my younger sister was dad's favorite. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So I was just kind of stuck in the middle, and when you're growing up, you don't even think about this stuff, but it's like you get older, you're like, man, and I felt like man, I wish I wish I would have had a closer relationship with my dad. And we weren't at odds. We're fine.
Right.
But I'm like, why, and it kind of left an imprint on me where I was like, man, I wish I would have had a father,
Right.
that was, connected to me and like my best friend, like a lot of people,
You
like,
could do everything
yeah, like
together.
my wife, her mom, was her best friend, you know what I'm saying? And I
Yeah.
was like, why didn't I get a dad that was my best friend? You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And he was a good guy, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
But
but you
just,
just had these needs that you
yeah.
wanted.
And I was like, but you know what? That drives me to, now I'm driven to, let me help these guys that grew up without a dad.
Oh, yeah.
I'm saying,
That's so true.
because I feel that pain from that. And so it's like God taking something that wasn't good,
Right. And
and
making it something.
and using it for good.
It's so interesting because like what we did at the conference is we had women give their testimonies. So we had 38 people that submitted their testimonies, and we had to draw, like, because I was like, I'm not picking these, it's just, so we drew names. So we had about 12 that ended up giving their testimonies. And it's so powerful because something that they're speaking on that got them through, like now they're living the life they never thought they'd have. It was hardships, alcoholism, whatever it was, abuse. A lot of times it was abuse. There's somebody that was in the audience that saw their self in what they said and thought, God, I'm not alone in this.
Right.
Like someone else, but we don't talk about that. Like through our life, we don't
Sure.
talk about the things that
Sure.
happen.
Yeah, because we're posting what we had for dinner.
Exactly. And putting our
amazing
best
vacation.
self
Right. Yeah.
out there. But it's so true. Like I think testimonies, it's always really strong in my heart because, you're sitting there listening to it, a real woman tell what she went through and she made it to the other side. And it's like gives you so much hope. And so it really helped people. And so we will always continue to do testimonies because I think they're so powerful,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Bible even speaks about how they overcame by the blood of the Lamb,
That's
the word
right.
of the testimony. And so, yeah, for sure. I think that whenever you share, like not try to put on a facade or try to pretend you've got it all together, whatever, but you actually genuinely share, listen, I really struggle with that.
Right.
I've overcome that. I'm still working on that. I got this to go, and you're reaching out and asking for help when you need it. I mean, as guys, we're horrible at that.
That's right.
We don't want to ask anybody for help.
No, they don't. No, guys don't. We don't even want to ask for directions either. For sure.
We don't even want to admit we need help.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
But what I found is like when you start stretching yourself, like we're talking about, getting out there outside of your comfort zone, you really need people,
You do.
and so you got to kind of set the ego aside, press out, and get some help with some people.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've gotten help. Like, okay, I don't even know how to start a podcast. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Exactly.
So I started reaching out. Hey, what's this? And then researching equipment and all that stuff.
You did a great job, by the way. I'm like impressed.
Well, I appreciate it.
I really am impressed.
I've kind of just it's kind of just like a little vision, and like we talked about, it starts out with God just kind of prompting me, and I don't know why. I'm just,
yes.
About a year ago, I guess I started kind of just thinking about a podcast, but before I really haven't watched a lot of them. I didn't know much about them. I don't know why. I just started thinking, well, I know why now.
But, why now for sure.
But then I just kind of backburnered it or whatever, and then I would just have random people in conversations. They would be like, you should start a podcast. And I'm thinking, that's odd because we're not even talking about that.
That's right. That's what's the confirmation you're talking about.
And so I'm like, okay, well, God, I guess you're trying to tell me something. And so then I start researching, and then I'm like, well, I don't even know what I'm going to do about. And then it's like, I think God kind of put it in my heart to just get his story out, that how he lives in us, you know what I'm saying? And so it's like the Bible's full of those stories, people, lives, but how God's intertwined with them, and Christ in us is the hope of glory, right?
That's right.
So it's like I just want to get those stories out because it's like what I've known is through the people that I've met, and when you get authentic with people, you're like, hey, look, this is amazing what God's been able to do in your life. But I also know you struggle with some stuff, and you got some stuff going on, you know what I'm saying? And I think that we got to lose that feeling of we got to be perfect before we can do anything.
You do, because then that's that pride.
Yeah.
I always feel like, and even like me, I just feel like when you're watching someone, you can tell if they're authentic or not. Yeah. You can really feel it, when you're talking to them. And that's always my hope, is to be that way. I want to be as authentic as I can. And, like I got a divorce. I was married for 20 years and I got a divorce, and we blended a family. I got remarried. And if anybody out there knows that blending a family is not easy,
it's not
at all. It's not easy. But like you said, God makes everything beautiful in its time.
Right.
And he did. He did for us. He made us, it's like we're all, we have 5 children together, and he did make it beautiful in his time. But I do know if you don't put God at the center of your marriage, and that's what happened to me in my first marriage. We just didn't do it, know. And we may have went to church and went through the motions, but we didn't do it. And so nothing against him or me. It's just, I think everyone should try to make it work if they can. But I just want to say that, nobody's perfect. And nobody who stands before you, we're all going to go through something. Everybody's going through things. And we're just, we've got to lean on each other and know that, trust that God's going to take care of it and going to make it beautiful in its time. So
and we absolutely should never define ourselves by our worst moments.
Right. Exactly.
You know
exactly.
And honestly, me and my current wife is at the time of the podcast, we've been married like 38 years.
Oh yeah.
But I actually got married young before that. We were both married before, and didn't work out. So, but I learned what I needed, and I learned what I shouldn't be.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
From that, and so it served us well, and I absolutely agree 100%. Because at that time, in fact, there was the divorce that God kind of used, or where we separated and we were going our separate ways. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it was actually the thought that, and I was like, whatever, whatever. My thought was totally wrong, but I was like, there's plenty of girls.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And but it was actually God used that thought to kind of capture me, and I was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like, your marriage is falling apart, and you don't even care. Like, what is wrong with you? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And of course, deep down I did care. You know what I'm saying? But but you're just putting that out there, and so that was kind of permeating in me. And then because I was a musician, there was this band that was playing at a church, and they said, man, they're really good. You should come here. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I wasn't going looking for God. Like I knew about God, and I knew I should be doing differently, but I was just going to hear the band, being honest with you.
Yes.
But going to that service, it was like God just used that as like the starter to start working on my heart. And then, and he used that to totally change. And I call it my adult commitment, when I to God, and he just totally revolutionized my life. And what's interesting is that year that so I started praying for my marriage, because that's what you should be doing, right?
Right.
So, and at that time, which was a lot of years ago, you had to be legally separated for a year. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not single.
That's right.
Because I'm trying to save this marriage, but I'm not married. I'm by myself. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I literally went to work. I'd come home and I would like do whatever chores I had to do or whatever, cook supper, whatever. And I would just read my Bible and I would pray, and I would just, and I just spent all that time because, I'm just, and I look back now, like that was a horrible year for me. Like going through it was just like, it sucked.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? But it was probably the greatest year of my life, because all the foundation and the things I know about God, I dug in that year, and I still can recall things I've learned and from that year. And that's where I say what happened was not good.
That's right. Yeah.
But God turned it to good. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm always amazed. How did God turn that to good? And he just does.
He just does.
Yeah.
And like sometimes I said this in my book, is sometimes we have to hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And that's when you hit rock bottom, he knows you're going to turn to him.
Right.
And when you do that and you start turning to him, he'll start kind of just leading you down the path of where you're supposed to go.
Right.
But it can be some of the worst times of your life. It can be really hard times of your life.
Yeah. And I look back, and I kind of say it like this: the worst times to me were the best times for me.
Right. That's so true. Yeah. And I don't know if everybody can, because that's really what happens. It's like the worst times. Like people now that may be listening, may be going through the worst times of their life.
Yeah.
I had a lady that reached out to me that literally she lost her mother, her father, her brother, her son, and her husband, like within 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And so, it's like, that's hard to come back from.
Sure.
And that's rock bottom, that really is. But, I think, and Catherine Varner was one of the speakers, grief speakers at the conference, and she's amazing. And I just met her, and it's just amazing. She's a grief expert. But, she talked about loving the people that are with you now.
Right.
Like, instead of worrying so much or grieving so much about who's gone, love the people that are with you now and realize that turn to God and just trust that he's going to take care of you because
Right.
he sees everything. He knows what you went
Sure.
through. He knows you don't have anybody left. And so it's easier to say than to go through, but I think that's so important.
What's interesting about kind of a perspective change I had with when somebody passes on and most people are like, I can't believe God took them from me.
Right.
And but when you kind of shift the perspective, like they were always his.
That's right.
He let you borrow them or loan them for whatever period of time, and
That's right.
We always wish it was more, right?
Yes.
But he didn't take them from you. They were his.
That's right. We think they're ours,
Right.
because they were in our life.
Yeah, and we take position. I think about like if I walked into my office at work and somebody's sitting in my chair with their feet propped up on my desk, I'm gonna be upset about it. I'm like, what are you doing in my office? But I don't own the office.
That's right.
It's not even mine.
Right.
I'm using it. It's on loan to me.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but we take ownership of things. Well, that was my person, and I can't believe you let something happen to him. And I was like, yeah, well, they weren't. It was God's person all along.
I always think about that with your job. You think there's no way they could live without me. How's this place going to run without me? And they do.
Yeah.
They'll run without you. And that always just shocks me because, you think that there's no way. And especially with this, so I actually retired the day before the Shine conference. The conference was February 22nd. And another leap of faith that I took to just step out and do that. I always felt like, what am I going to do if I don't have my job?
Right.
And so I've just little by little just trusted God to get me through it. And it's just been one of the best years of my life because it's 55. I always say 55 is my year because I wrote the book, we did the conference, and I retired.
Right.
But it's just like it was probably there all along, but I just kept thinking it was other things.
Right.
And I just want people to know that he's got the same thing for you.
Right.
And I think that's your purpose for doing this is like letting people know that.
Yeah, for sure. So we probably need to start wrapping up, right?
Definitely.
Because I think me and you
could talk forever.
Yeah, we could for sure, and maybe we need to do part 2.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But just kind of any last thoughts or anything you'd want to share to the listener viewers out there as we kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, I know I've already said it about God's plan for your life. that He does have a plan for each of us, and that's always really my main thing that I always say. And as far as so with us, the leap of faith that we took to do the conference, now Wichita Falls reached out to us. So that's our next one. And it's October 18th. So we're going to go to Wichita Falls, and it's Wichita Falls, Texas, because a lot of people think, I think there must be another Wichita Falls, Kansas.
Yeah.
But it's Wichita Falls, Texas. And we are taking the same Shine conference that we did here in Beaumont. We're taking it over there,
awesome. Bringing
the same testimonies. And we are just so excited because our team has grown. We've doubled in size. We have about 30 people on our team. And it's such an exciting time. And so we're going to actually go February 7th of 2026. So I just want to tell everybody we're doing our Shine Women's Conference at Ford Park. And so it'll be at Doggett Ford Park.
And don't you have something working kind of in Little Rock?
Yes. And so we had a lady, and it's just like what I'm trying to say is God opens doors for you, but he also closes doors.
Sure.
And so I feel like he's opening doors for us because of what the Shine Conference did. It's helping women realize who they are, what his plan is for their life, and how to step into it. Yeah. And so, Little Rock, Arkansas is our next one also.
So if, the listeners, viewers wanted to connect with you or find out more about that, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's kellytaubertministries.com. So, Taubert, I'm sure my name's on here, but it's Taubert, Taubert. But kellytaubertministries.com, and we'll have everything on there. We're going to have a gala to raise some money because one of the things we want to do is have everyone be able to afford to come to the conference.
Yes.
That's on my heart. I never was wanting to make money. That's never my goal. I just want to make enough to pay for the conference, and it's a win if we can do that.
Sure.
And so anyway, if I can reach out to women, and so we're going to do the Shine Gala. It's on June 27th, and I'm just super excited about it because it's going to be a red carpet event. So everybody's going to dress up. You can bring your husband, you can bring your sisters, moms, and be there. And your ticket that you purchased is helping women be able to afford. You're partnering with us.
Yes, that's awesome. So, I guess in a wrap up, I guess I would want to say to everybody, like, uh, you know, give God an opportunity. I just want to kind of implore people, like, give God an opportunity to write your story. You know what I'm saying?
Right. That's so
Talking about
good.
your life, his story. Let him write it instead of you writing it. Because
Exactly.
the story he could write through you is way beyond what you could ever imagine. I'm so impressed with like how you've kind of stepped out in these, just little steps of faith, and then it grew, and then it grew, and then it grew, and I just think that, like, that's available for everybody.
That's what,
You know
so
what I'm
just
saying?
like you're doing now and like I did, they can do the same thing.
Yes.
And I hope by listening to this, they'll really think about it and really think about what they're passionate about. What do they really love to do? And just take that leap of faith for sure.
And if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, and you don't know him, I'm going to highly recommend it.
Yes, for
I'm going to
sure.
highly recommend it. That talking about my adult commitment, that was, I don't know, 40 years ago or something. And I would have nothing but raving reviews, 5-star reviews.
Right. Yes, exactly.
For God. So anyway, I'd love, any kind of feedback, any kind of comments, love to just connect with people. If some of the story Kelly has today is kind of ministered to you, or kind of, maybe inspired you to do something, I'd love to hear about it. So anyway, for this week, we're going to wrap up. And so thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.